So we're going to continue with our first of two authentication lessons. Today's lesson 9 will carry on into lesson 10. So we've got the ability now to register. And our next task is to build a page that will actually check credentials in the database. We've downloaded this login form from Blackboard. And just like with our register form, if we look at line 8, we've got kind of some yellow highlighting because this is going to post to a form called validate.php, and this form doesn't exist. This page doesn't exist either. So you can either create the new file manually, or if you're using PHP Storm, you can use the code hinting here to create the file called validate.php. So that's what we want to do next. Click on that. In this case, this is going to be a completely hidden page. There's only PHP code. There's basically one of two things that can happen here. Either the user logs in successfully, and if they do, we're actually going to bring them right to our games page. And if the login is unsuccessful, we want to bring them back to this screen, but we want to print an invalid login message across the top. So we don't actually need any HTML here at all. We'll just wipe it out. So we'll put on a set of PHP tags. And we'll set out the steps with comments first. We want to get form inputs. We don't need to do any validation, really. We'll connect. We want to check if the user exists, if username exists. Check if password is valid. And then we'll redirect. We're either going to go to the games page or we're going to go back to the login page, one or the other. Our first two lines are going to be identical. Again, from the form, we're going to grab the username and we'll grab the password. Chat window again in case there's questions. Our connection is going to be simple. Include our database file. So our SQL is going to look like this. We're going to select star from users where so first we're just going to check the username. We're going to fetch that user. If the username exists, then we're going to hash the password and check it. We'll set up our command the same way we've always done with prepare. So this code should be getting pretty familiar. Connect to the database, set up an SQL command, set up an SQL statement, and then prepare to execute it. And we have to fill our username as a string, max 50 characters. So nothing new here. So now we want to execute our query. And then we'll use the fetch command that we've used before to select, this selects a single record. So if this username is in our table, our user variable will get populated. If this username doesn't exist, this is going to be null. So we'll say if empty, if not empty, so if we find a matching username, then we want to check the password. If this email address exists in the database, then we're going to hash the password and check it. So we used password hash before to create the new password. PHP also has a password verify method. So this is used for logins. So it wants to know, so we take our password, and again, I believe we're going to use password default. I'm just going to check our method in the documentation for a minute. Oh, sorry. Wrong. We're going to compare the password that the user typed in the login form with the password in the database, with our user password. So if these are the same, password is valid. If not, we're going to say so if the passwords aren't the same, we're going to take the user back to log in again. And if our user isn't even found, like we don't even have their email address, we're going to do the same thing. So we've got three scenarios. First scenario is we find the username. Our user's not empty. And when we we check the password matches what's in our database. Scenario number two, we have the username, but the password that they provided isn't good. We're going to send them back to the login screen. Scenario three is we can't even find the username. So those are our three possibilities of what could happen here. So I'm going to try the page like this. I'll put all the code up on Pastebin. And I'm going to try all three scenarios, just to check. We'll need to do a little bit more with this. Here's the Pastebin link if you need it. So you get the username, get the password, connect to the database. First, see if this username even exists. If it does, we're not going to really do anything. We're just going to show a blank screen. If the username exists, but the password is bad, we're going to go back to login. And if the username doesn't even exist, again, we're going to go back to login. So I'm going to test all three of these scenarios. So my first scenario is I enter Wednesday@gc.ca with the password test1234. This should give me a blank screen, I think, hopefully, because my username exists and this password belongs to this username. Okay, so blank screen, that's encouraging. If I put in a username that doesn't exist, I get redirected back here, and notice now it says invalid equals true in the address. If I put in a proper username with a bad password, I also get sent back here. So there's our three scenarios. So far they seem to be working properly. So if the user is found and the password is correct, we need to come back now at this point. We've identified, hey, we've authenticated this person properly. We have their username and they gave us the right password that matches the password hash in the database. So this is where the session object that we talked about in the first hour of class comes in, right? We don't want to stay on this page. The user wants to leave and go to the rest of the site. But before we let them leave, we're going to store their identity in the session. So first we're going to call session start. So this accesses the current session. We then want to take their username and store it in a session variable. So when they leave this page, we're going to store in their user session who they are. So I'm going to use the session collection and create a session variable called username. Store identity in a session variable. And then we want to go to the games page. So no matter how they get to this page, we're not staying on this page. We're taking them somewhere else. The games page, if their credentials are good, and back to the login page if the credentials aren't good. So I'll put up a new version of this. So before we leave, this is like stamping their passport. Yes, we know who you are, and carry this passport, carry this session identifier with you wherever you go. So we know you've logged into the site. We know who you are. So I'll just try this again. So when I put in a valid login now, I get redirected here. When I put in a bad login, it keeps me here. Here's the updated version. So here's the new stuff. So once we know who the user is, we want to record in the session. So that session will stay active so long as they don't log out, which we haven't built yet. So long as they don't log out, and so long as the user doesn't close their browser or have the site timeout from inactivity. As long as they're active in the site, that session will stay active. I think there are about 2 more things with our login and registration that I'd like to do today. Does anybody have questions before I move forward? Is there any part of this that you'd like to look at in a bit more detail? Colton, that's a great question. What counts as being active is interacting with the server. So that means making an HTTP request either by clicking a link or submitting a form. So if you load a page, but all you do is look at it and you don't save anything or click a link, your session will time out after. Actually, let's check the default. Apache default session timeout. Excuse me. So we can override it. Used to default. So the default's actually 5 minutes. So if you don't change this, if we load a page when we're logged in and we don't load a new page or do a form submission or a refresh, after 5 minutes with Apache as the web server, it'll actually log us out. Good question. Cool. So we should also deal with this, right? Right now, if I put in a bad login, oh, I already have that in the database. It says invalid true, but there's no kind of visual indicator to the user. So we maybe want to print an error message in red that says invalid login. So let's go back to our login. And we'll say, underneath our H1, but above our form, we'll use PHP to write a simple if statement here. We'll say if not empty, get invalid. So if there's a parameter in the URL called invalid, we're going to show an error message. Echo so we'll print a heading in red if the user's login attempt failed. Otherwise, we'll maybe show a blue alert at the top that just says, please enter your credentials. So users are always going to see an H5 at the top, but we'll toggle the message text, and we'll toggle the colors. So we can try this. So again, this is on the login form. after our H1, but above our form. So now it looks something like this. When I go to log in initially, I get this blue message. Same format to what we've got on the registration page. Again, if you think H5 is too big, you can use H6, or you could just use a div tag or a section tag, whatever you like, paragraph tag. So now if I put in a bad login, you'll notice that H5 is toggled. Instead of my blue, it shows uses the danger class, and it shows our other message. So now the user knows the login attempt failed. They don't know why. They don't know if it was the username that was the problem or the password that was the problem. We don't really have to tell them. All they need to know is that the login that they gave us is not good. There's one thing missing as well from our save registration. One more thing I'd like to do with that. Can anybody think about what other functionality we should add when we're saving a new user that we haven't done? There's a potential problem with, our code works, but there's a scenario we should be probably accounting for when we're creating new users. That's right, David, right? We're not doing any checking. So right now, I could create a user account with an email address that we've already got in the database, which websites should never allow us to do. We don't want duplicate usernames. Imagine the security nightmare that would cause. Two people tried to use the same email address to sign up, or even the same person, still going to be really messy because they're going to say, why can't I see all my information if we let them create separate accounts with the same email? So what could we do on this page? How would we prevent that if we look at what's here, right? We're grabbing the username and password. We're making sure the inputs are valid. And then we just connect and set up and run our insert. So what should we do here in terms of what do we need to do that check? Or maybe a simpler question is, where should we put this check? If you look at the line numbers, when in this process would it make sense to see, do we already have this email address? I think that makes sense. We're still going to need to connect to the database, but all of this, we should wrap this in an if statement, right? First, we want to query the users table for the current username. Do we already have them? If we do, we don't want to do any of this stuff. And our redirect to login. So let's do an if statement here. Check if user already exists. So first we want to run a select query. Star from users where username This is actually the same query we're doing on our validate page. When someone logs in, we're checking the users table for this username. We'll call prepare on our connection. Now we need to fill the username variable. So we'll call bind parameter. So this is actually same code we wrote on our validate page. We'll run our query. And then we're going to call fetch to see if we already found this username. And then we'll want to evaluate, did we get a user back? When we look for this username in our users table, did anything come back, or is our query empty? So if our user variable is not empty, in this case, we're going to echo, we could do it this way, maybe an H5. So if this happens, we'll say we can disconnect here. And we can actually just call exit. Stop processing more code. So if we found this user, let's print a message and just ignore everything down below. We don't need to do any of this. If our user is empty, it means that account doesn't exist, and we can just keep on going. So I'm injecting this code, and now we're going to try it out. So I put it in the chat, so it goes between after we connect to the database, but before we create a new user account. So I'm going to try this out. I'm going to try twice more, once with an email that I know is already in my database, and then I've got to make sure that our original code to register will still doesn't get broken by this. So I'm going to try those two scenarios. So I'm going to put in a user. I'll use my Wednesday@gc.ca because I know this is already in there. Right? I've got wed@gc.ca. So I'm going to try and use the same user. That's good. Tells me my user already exists. And if I query my database again, I want to make sure it doesn't actually create them again, which it doesn't. So now if I do, I don't know, twos@gc.ca, in this case, it takes me over to the login screen, which suggests that this worked. And now if I check my database, I've got my new user. So we should never be allowing, we should always, when we're registering users, we should always be doing a duplicate check on the username. Always. So we're not just going to insert people automatically. We need to know that we don't already have their username before we do anything else and let them in. Okay, we've done a fair bit today. So our site is still not really secure. We can register users and we can log in, but we haven't actually controlled any access, right? Anybody, no matter who they are, they can still add, edit, or delete, whether they've logged into the site or whether they're anonymous. Doesn't matter. We also haven't added any ability So again, if we'll show you where we want to get to this. Yeah, that's right. That's kind of a good way of thinking about it, David. We sort of built the gate, but yeah, the gate in the middle of the path with no fence yet. So I think we'll pause for today. We've done quite a bit, and I hope I haven't overloaded you, but I'm not going to add any more to this. So where are we going with this next week? So notice here on my site, I'm not logged in right now. This is on my other section site. And when I go to the list, again, I know I showed you this earlier in the class, but I get a read-only view. So all my links are hidden. Once I log in, however, now when I go here, I've got access to all the links. And my register and login links in the nav bar, those are hidden. And instead it shows me my username and it gives me the ability to log out. Once I log out, again, I'm back to a read-only view. So we're going to want to implement these features in our site as well. So when we do log in, first of all, the links in our nav bar change that show who we are and let us log out. And we'll also want it so that this page, when we're not logged in, we don't see these things as links. We just get a kind of a read-only view. And we shouldn't have access to the pages for adding, editing, deleting, and saving. So we haven't really added any access control to these pages yet. The first steps were to build our user table, understand how sessions work, understand how hashing works, and then create the ability for people to register and log in using hashing and using sessions. So I think we've accomplished that. I'm going to upload everything to GitHub today. If you've missed anything, and the class is recorded, I will upload. Also, if you didn't have a chance yet to contribute to the Miro whiteboard, please do so. You have until next week to do it, but make sure you add a sticky note and include your name. Okay, so yeah, see some other comments here. That's great, Chris.
Thank you.
And for your checklist, I just need to update one thing on here. So you'll want to make sure you enable the code we did today. So for next week, I'm going to recommend you get started on assignment 2. I've discounted any grades from the week 8 quiz, and it's the same quiz questions for week 9 that are now in the lesson 10 folder. Okay, so around things that we talked about today: hashing, encryption, sessions, cookies, authentication, authorization. So everything you need to answer the quiz, you have until next week to do it. David, I will enable this because you did mention it. Here's a JavaScript you can also find in the lesson 9 folder from this website, from formget.com. It's a JavaScript that will show you, that will let you visually tell users as they're entering a password, it will rate it for security. I think this is checking that it's 6 characters. But if you wanted to implement it, yeah, you could take a stab at implementing that. If we have time, maybe next week, we'll add it in. Okay. So yes, I didn't write it. I took it, but I've sourced it. Whoops, I will make it available. So that's here in lesson 9. If you want to give it a whirl, go ahead. All right, folks, so that's it for today. Make sure you have your register and login working, because next week we're going to continue working with this stuff. Have a look at assignment 2 and maybe decide which version you want to do and get rolling so you can get help, and be sure you do your review quiz. There won't be any quiz after next week's class. Okay, most classes have quizzes, but next week there won't be one. Okay, I will push everything up to GitHub, and I'll upload the videos when they are done processing on WebEx. Okay, I hope you all have a great week. Feel free to use office hours if you have a question. Okay, have a great week. Thanks for joining today. I'll see you next week.